Hi, Robert here with what I hope will be a mini-series over the next few days or even weeks, depending on how it is received by you, my viewers. So what is this series about? Well, I think it important that we continue to understand what's going on in the world today, so I will still be uploading information that I feel you have the right to know. However, in this particular series, which I will name part 1, 2s and 3s, so you can follow it along and skip the ones in between, which is, I hope you don't, but I will be leaning more towards the history and solutions you can start to understand and use in practical ways given where the world's going and individual countries at the moment. It will, I assure you, place a new spin on the phrase taking the law into your own hands. But first, in this series, is the need to understand where and why all this happened. And for those of you who have been crying out for me to get back to history, what better way than to start with the foundations given by an expert on the subject so you know where, why and who our current oppressive system came from and who benefits the most from it. This will be followed by another solutions-based episode on EMF protection and my personal assessment of the Resotone Shield I know many people have been waiting so long and patiently for. But I've also added affordable ways to protect yourself and the family while you use this channel more as a resource than as entertainment. So the protection of your family against harmful EMFs will be going up very shortly. It's almost finished. As I move through these solutions, you will realize it is not the system that holds true power, but the people if approached in the right ways. I have enlisted the help of experts on this matter who has not just talked about these things, but has won many hundreds of court battles using what will be shared with you over the next few weeks. The time has passed for complaints. It is time to do something about our dwindling rights in a way that avoids being sucked into the vortex of distraction and violence. Once you understand the basic difference between things like petition and a mandate, you will stop wasting your time begging to be heard and become someone who is feared. Knowledge is power, and this series is going to hand it directly to you over the next few episodes. What you do with that is up to you, but you will be left with no excuses not to educate yourself in ways that they would rather you not. Did you know the system even changed or removed certain words and definitions within dictionaries, which places them, or us should I say, in a weakened position? And did you know older dictionaries still maintain the original and current power we can tap into if you stop reading the digitized versions which have already been doctored? Just some of the things that will be discussed along the way with how to deal with vaccinations, 5G rollout, and we may even cover mortgages and taxes just to make sure your supreme rights are not perverted by the commercial laws when you have the power to fight them. I think it's time we were educated on our rights and presented with solutions in using those rights in simple terms. In this introduction episode, I urge you to pay close attention and watch until the end because this is the first part of your ongoing education. It is full of background knowledge and, as I say, your first lesson in order to understand where we came from, who we really are, and what you will be able to do regarding your personal sovereignty. So, with all of that being said, class this, I hope, as a mini resource course with much more interesting stuff to come, and I'll see you on the other side.
In the year 2007, the mortgage crisis hit the United States. Several of the guys in my unit got together we were sitting around the shop one day and talking about how we were losing our homes and we were all about to be tossed out on the street. We were really kind of worried about it. As we were sitting around talking shop, we were like, hey, we got the clearances to do this. We know people in the right places. Let's get together and let's see if we can't drum up and figure out what in the heck happened. What in the heck caused this mortgage crisis incident, and what really happened there. So after a few months of digging, we had ran across Judge David Wynn Miller and Russell J. Foucault Gould, and what they had done to the mortgage industry that they were responsible for. And that was that they had syntaxed the mortgages and found them to be 100% grammatical fraud. And so that was a big eye-opener for us. So we looked at that and we were like, hey, so it wasn't the subprime mortgage lending that led to the collapse. It was the fact that these guys had syntaxed the actual contracts, the banking and mortgage contracts, and found them to be 100% grammatical fraud. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac immediately bundled those up and sold them to Bank of America. And 3 days later, when Bank of America found out they were sitting on bad paper, they sold them to, I believe it was Wells Fargo. And from there, the fire sales had started with these bundled mortgages. So with that, we started digging deeper. Well, who is Russell J. Gould and who is David Wynn Miller? But what really unlocked the entire mystery for us was the fact that there was a grammar key on the mortgages that had been syntaxed, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac mortgages that were syntaxed by these guys. They had a grammar key or a syntax key on the side of the paperwork. And so we were like, okay, well, we understand how syntax works and how there was grammatical fraud going on, but what gave this key, this syntax key that they were putting on the paperwork, the power to syntax that document? And with that, that's where we uncovered the largest national security secret in this nation's history, if not the world itself. So what this did was it led us down, basically this led us down several rabbit holes. And one of the rabbit holes that it led us down was we had to start, first we had to go all the way back to the beginning of U.S. history or American history to figure out what in the world was going on there, because this goes back that far. So we went all the way back to the start of the 13 colonies and the original bankruptcy of the United States, and that's really what this all stems from, is the bankruptcy of the United States, the first bankruptcy. And so when the 13 colonies was fighting for its freedom from the British Crown, there was a post office down in Philadelphia, and that was the Benjamin Franklin Post Office. And that post office was open until the war started, and because all war vacates contracts. So because the 13 colonies weren't yet an independent nation state of their own, or a nation of their own, they had to close that post office down because they were fighting for that national statehood. And after the American Revolution, that post office couldn't be opened back up because it was in a state of bankruptcy. It owed 1.6 million francs to the French for funding the American Revolution. So at that point, Spain and France argued over who was going to put the Postmaster General position here in the colonies to open it up to commerce. And why is that important? Why was that so important? Well, when we take a look at it, Spain argued that they had found America first, that Christopher Columbus had found America first, and so they had rights to it. France argued that without loaning America the 1.6 million francs, America wouldn't even be open for capture. But the King of Great Britain, or Great Britain still being the reigning monarch in the world, told Spain and France, I'm still the reigning monarch in the world, and I'm going to put my post office in up there. Those are my people. And when we went back and looked at the American history, you could see that the founders of the Republic talked about that. They said that they would much rather have chosen Great Britain as opposed to Spain or France, because they were used to Great Britain's wiles. They understood how that monarch operated. And so they decided that it was best to just continue working with him, because they knew how he operated, and they knew the wiles of this guy's operation and how his construct worked. And they weren't too sure about Spain or France and didn't want to start getting involved with someone they didn't know anything about. So they decided to go ahead and joined her with Great Britain, and they put the post office in Washington, D.C., Great Britain's post office in Washington, D.C., which is a foreign enclave of the United States. It never has been part of the United States, and it was opened up as the District of Columbia as a foreign enclave because it was the post office for Great Britain. So what that means is that the King of Great Britain placing his post office here opened up commerce to the rest of the world because he was the reigning monarch. So if the rest of the monarchs or dictators wanted to come into this country and rape and pillage it for its goods, they would have to go through him and his post office. So everything that was shipped in and out of this country, all commerce, he got a piece of through that post office. So that was the first bankruptcy, was Benjamin Franklin borrowed 1.6 million francs from the French. The second bankruptcy started when Abraham Lincoln borrowed the money from the IMF and the World Bank. Now, before I get into that, I want to say this. So the Founding Fathers had a pact, and that was that an accord, a gentleman's agreement between themselves, and that was that they were to never borrow any money from the IMF and the World Bank. And that is because the IMF and the World Banks owe no allegiance to any one particular monarch. And so they decided, the agreement was that they would only borrow money from other monarchs because the monarchs were only as powerful as their armies. And if they stayed in contract with two monarchs at the same time, if one monarch ever decided to try and invade the colonies, they would have to concur with the other monarch first before they could invade, so they didn't mess up something that other monarch had going on. So it gave the colonies time to react and get a plan in place to go ahead and move forward and try to figure out how to get themselves out of whatever debacle they might have found themselves in. So at a later time, as we went through the historical records and we ran into, of course, the Civil War was next, we found out that Abraham Lincoln, after the colonies dissolved and they broke in half, there was no more United States. It had ended, the North against the South. So you have two separate countries fighting against each other, essentially, is what happened here during the Civil War, because the South did raise its own flag and did substantiate itself as its own nation state. Abraham Lincoln, we found, violated the pact. He was the president that went ahead and borrowed money from the IMF and the World Bank, thereby violating the gentleman's agreement or the accord that the Founding Fathers had to never do that. And when he did, he initiated the beginning of the second international bankruptcy. That led us down into, of course, 1933 to the beginning of the third and final international bankruptcy, and also the Great Depression, the stock market crash of 1929. And from there, this is all laid out historically with what happened in relation to this syntax key that had been placed on these mortgages. And this is how far back we had to track to find out what in the world gave this syntax key power to be utilized on these mortgage contracts to conduct the syntacking in the manner that had been conducted, to validate the fact that they were all grammatical fraud, banking fraud, grammar fraud, you name it, fraud. Once we had backtracked that key and found out how it was given the authority to be placed on that contract to conduct the syntacking that it had conducted, we ran across the largest national security secret ever covered up in the history of the United States. So this led us right back into the birth certificate and how the birth certificate system even got started here in America.
People are used as collateral with other nations because the U.S. is bankrupt. The United States declared bankruptcy on March 9th of 1933. At this point, the U.S. began taking out loans from a private, non-government affiliated corporation called the Federal Reserve. With no money to pay back the loans, the United States began using the citizens as collateral.
And that started back in 1933 with the end of the beginning of the third and final international bankruptcy. And of course, we had found out at that point that the United States owed so much to the IMF and the World Bank for what Lincoln had done that we had to give up, Roosevelt had to give up all of the gold that was here in the United States to pay off the debt to the IMF and the World Bank. So the United States was completely broke. We had no money. And so they devised the birth certificate system. in which case the people themselves were the gold bars, became the gold bars. And they had been built for taxes to pay off whatever debt was still remained, whatever debt still remained, or whatever debt was still going to be incurred by the financial needs of the United States. And that system came to an end on November 2nd, 1999. That entire system came to an end. And with that, like I said, we uncovered the largest national security secret ever kept in the history of the United States. We still don't know why it's been kept a secret. We have a good idea of why it's been kept a secret, because we understand now that the deep state's in charge. We understand who the deep state is, we know how they operate, and this has been one of the largest deep state secrets in the history of the United States. And we're bringing it forward because we understand what the hell happened. So you think to yourself, okay, well, you know, it's a birth certificate system, so what? You know, so they use the people as chattel to create an income off of, so they could substantiate the wealth that was necessary to go ahead and get us through our administrative ordeals as a nation. As we got looking at this thing, and we researched it further and deeper into what the birth certificate system was, this thing was attached to the largest warfare platform in the world that was essentially created to go ahead and capture everybody on the planet as chattel or property. And this was how they were going to go ahead and create their wealth off the sweat of everybody else's backs. And so this led us, of course, right back to the Vatican, London City, and the Pentagon. And those were the three locations on planet Earth, the three war castles, so to speak, that substantiated the empire of the three city-states. And I encourage all you guys out there to take a look at the empire of the three city-states and do your research on the empire of the three city-states and exactly what that is. The Vatican itself, when we looked at the Vatican, this place was just the esotericism there, the esoteric symbolism behind this entire warfare platform was all over it. I mean, this thing just reeked of esoteric knowledge. It was just, the symbols were everywhere. Now when you look down at the Vatican, you see a keyhole and a phallus, and of course the timelines and the shipping lanes coming off there, and the keyholes that lead to those, the doorways that lead from those timelines and shipping lanes from the phallus, from the center of the keyhole there, or the womb, the female womb. And if you look around it, you'll see a bunch of men, statues, just statues of a bunch of guys all around this keyhole. And what they are doing is, this is an orgy. And these guys are waiting, literally, waiting their turn to fuck the world. And I can't emphasize that enough, what that means. They're waiting for their turn to be the next pope so they can be in charge of what they're in charge of. And when we looked at what they were laying claim to being in charge of, when you look at the Vatican, was time. That warfare platform was a location on planet Earth to capture time. And it was demonstrated by the gargoyles that were there holding the sands of time horizontally to stop the sands from flowing up and down, and they therefore had captured time with the Gregorian calendar. Now with the Gregorian calendar, they tell you what day Monday is, what day Tuesday is, what day Wednesday is. And that is the calendar all the stock markets on planet Earth use to pay out to. All shipping and commerce moves by that calendar. So these guys, we found out, have nothing to do with Jesus Christ. They have nothing to do with God. They literally watch the movement and shipment of all commerce. And they say, or they claim, that they have been given, they have heavenly authorizations to be in command and control of those shipping lanes and those timelines, to watch the shipment and movement of all commerce. So basically all they do is watch the shipment and movement of all monies and all cargo on planet Earth, to include the militaries, because you can't move militaries without money being somewhere first. So these guys know where the wars are going to be, they know where they're going to start, and they know who's behind starting them and finishing them off. That's what we found out in the long run. So when we took a look at how all this worked, it ran back to the 3 international bankruptcies, like I said, and the third and final international bankruptcy came to an end in 1999. And when that happened, the post office that Great Britain had opened up in the enclave of Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, had to close down. The king had to vacate the position, and the trustee for the bankruptcy had always been the President of the United States. He was the administrator for the bankruptcy, always has been. Well, with the end of the third and final international bankruptcy, the post office was closed down, and so we no longer needed a trustee because there was no more bankruptcy. But that was the long-range warfare plan of Great Britain, was to use the IMF and the World Bank because they knew we weren't going to be able to pay back the interest that Abraham Lincoln had incurred by borrowing the money from the IMF in the first place. And with the end of the third and final international bankruptcy, the king would step in, pay the debt to the IMF and the World Bank off, and capture the United States back again as part of Great Britain, and we would all become peasants and serfs again. But the post office had closed down, and he had to vacate. Well, during that time that he had to vacate, there was 18 days there that post office was vacant. And during that time, Russell-J. Foucault and David-Wynne-Miller had seen this whole thing coming. They had been studying the bankruptcies. These guys were great at it. They understood the courts and the ports, and they understood that the neutral ports were the courts. And with that, Russell, understanding what was about to take place here, ran up to the Pentagon and asked the Pentagon if they had a copyright and patent on the Title IV flag for the United States, the Title IV flag. And of course the Pentagon told him no one's ever asked us that before, Russ, and he said it doesn't matter anyway because the grammar on the contract was all grammar fraud. I've syntaxed it and disqualified it, and my country's about to be captured, and as an American I have the right to protect my flag and my nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and this was a domestic takeover. So he captures the flag, takes off to the United Nations, legs in at the United Nations, and when the United Nations said, okay, but all the land on planet Earth is taken up, Russ, what land do you choose? He said, well, we choose the land of the courts during the time of the contract. And of course, with that gave them the highest and most powerful court on planet Earth. He turns around, and during that 18-day vacancy, he legs back in as Postmaster General here for the United States and keeps the continuance of the evidence for the post office open to allow commerce to still be conducted, but under his authority, not under Great Britain's any longer. So he had just succeeded Great Britain as the sovereign because he was given sovereignty status by the United Nations that allowed him to authorize the conduction of all commerce and the continuance of that commerce here in the United States. And now we took a big look at that and we were like, holy cow. So the Navy's sitting in foreign ports around the world. The Florida Chads, during the 1999 Florida Chads, the United States ceased to exist for 90 days. It was done. But there was an 18-day period in there where the post office was closed down. There was no longer a president. There was no longer a need for a middleman or a trustee anymore. So the Navy's sitting in foreign ports around the world with no country, and Russ had just taken the flag, and they have no flag. So they're sitting in foreign ports around the world in warships, and I'm sure all the weapons were like, what nation are you guys from, and where's your flag at? And when we went through the presidential paperwork and the congressional record, this is all chronicled in the congressional record and the presidential paperwork that we had ran across for that day, that we had found with what happened was that Bill Clinton was halfway around the world in Kosovo with the National Security Council. At 9 a.m. in the morning, he got a phone call from here in the United States telling him that the Title IV flag had just been captured by Foucault and Russell-J. Foucault and Gould and Foucault and David-Wynne-Miller, and it was now their new flag. They had just saved the United States from a surrender and takeover of Great Britain, this orchestrated long-range warfare attack that these guys had spent 200 years orchestrating had been stopped in its tracks by these guys. So the Navy immediately signed on with Russ in 2003, and we're like, you're the new sovereign for the country, you got the flag, you saved the United States from surrender and takeover. Outstanding, no one's ever done that. And he legged in with them and leased the flag to the Navy so the Navy could continue to conduct it's commerce, it's shipment, because the Navy's all shipping. So they were able to ship themselves around the world and continue to protect the United States in a defensive posture, or offensively should they need to move to an offensive posture. Russell J. Gould had quietly become the new, we call him Commander-in-Chief of the North American continent, the United States, and also Canada, and has to do with postal. So Russell took over as Postmaster General here in the United States, and the Canada Post Office has always been attached to that location. So he took over as the Canada Postmaster General as well, taking command and control of the entire North American continent in the process. So this is when we started hearing a bunch of stuff about how the U.S. Constitution had come to an end. We were hearing the administration up in Washington, D.C. tell us, hey, there is no Constitution. And we couldn't figure that out. We were like, what in the hell are you guys talking about? There's no U.S. Constitution. Well, it wasn't the actual U.S. Constitution itself that dissolved in relation to the Bill of Rights and your freedoms here and the way the government operates as far as the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. But in relation to that, they were saying that there was no U.S. Constitution. But it wasn't so much that, like I said, that the U.S. Constitution itself dissolved. It was the banking constitution that constituted the United States. That end of the Constitution, the outline for the banking constitution, had come to an end. It was the end of the third and final international bankruptcy, so we no longer needed a trustee. So the people of the United States would then have to be informed, hey, we now need to reconsolidate and resubstantiate the entire country. We need to pick a new Senate. We need to pick a new Congress. We need to pick a new president or elect a new president. And we have to go through the entire rebuilding process for the United States to move forward in a quantum manner, because the new Postmaster General system is all quantum. And he was the only person in the history of the world to do this, set up this quantum construct. And we'll get into that quantum construct here in a little bit, but I wanted to tell you guys about the rumors we were hearing about the U.S. Constitution coming to an end. It wasn't the U.S. Constitution and our laws and our liberties. It was the fact that the banking constitution had come to an end and was closed out with the end of the third and final international bankruptcy. And with that, the birth certificate system here in the United States ended. And so there's all the little kids that have been born since 1999 aren't supposed to be born on a birth certificate system. And the birth certificate system itself, when we looked at that, was one of the most nefarious pieces of the Empire of the Three City States warfare platform to capture everybody as peasants or serfs or chattel, property. And when we sat back and took a good look at the birth certificate system, when you're born on this planet and your mother has you in her arms in the hospital when you're first born, the RN comes in the room and says, hey, you need to sign this birth certificate before you can leave the hospital with the baby, or you can't leave with the baby. Well, that's a lie. You're trying to tell me I can't leave the hospital with my child unless I sign this document, this birth certificate document? That's kidnapping. That's illegal. You can't take my baby from me and hold my baby just because I don't sign your document. That's crazy. So what we found out was that the baby's name is all in capital letters on the birth certificate. And when your mom signs that thing, she signs in cursive, which is considered necromancy, communication with the dead. Well, the only place you find all capital letters in anyone's name is on a tombstone. That's the only place you're supposed to find it. You're a dead entity. Well, when you're born into this world, you're considered a dead entity due to the shipping war that we're all in. So you're automatically, when she signs that document, and everybody signs in cursive, she's conducting necromancy, communicating with the dead. And when you're legged into that massive corporate construct of the Empire of the Three City States, you're automatically presumed missing, dead, or presumed lost at sea. So you're a dead person. You're just a piece of cargo. So when you take a big look at this in relation to the esoteric symbolism behind what the Vatican is doing and what London City and those guys are doing, and the P2 Mason lodges, the Knights of Malta, the Knights of Columbus, and the Jesuits, which is the militia for the Vatican. This group of people are the secret lodges on this planet, and they utilize this shipping warfare system to conduct commerce on planet Earth. It's how they make their riches. quite frankly, we found that a little aggravating. I mean, we were pretty upset when we got to the bottom of what the birth certificate system is. It's claiming that you are owned. You know, you're a piece of cargo and that you're owned. Owned by whom? Well, we're owned by the Vatican. And they claim a lot more than just your body. They're literally claiming things within you. I would go so far as to say your soul. And I mean, you want to talk about a construct, a warfare platform on this planet that is nothing but nefaric. That is it. The Vatican is the location. So what we were looking at was, with this global system of governance, was we'll just call her a female. We'll call her, as a matter of fact, well, it's the Great Whore of Babylon. She's the Great Whore of Babylon, as clearly laid out in the Bible. This system is based in Admiralty and Maritime, the International Admiralty and Maritime Law of the Sea. And all of the corporations on planet Earth, to include the Empire of the Three City-States specifically, contribute to the strengths and the existence of this system, this female, we'll call her. In relation to what Commander-in-Chief Russell J. Gould has done with his system, was that he created a now-time scenario, and with that, of course, he had his own elemental table and a periodic table and elemental chart, and his elemental chart was so genius in its construct that it destroyed the previous elemental chart. And when it did that, it took down the planet's ability to communicate. It has just destroyed all the nations' ability to communicate with one another in relation to shipping and the movement of commerce, because they could not create a mathematical fact or a 0 point to base their sums and differences upon. So it destroyed their ability to communicate with one another. So when he went back in and captured the position as Postmaster General here in the United States and resubstantiated all commerce, he had to reopen the United States back up to international trade and commerce. And when he did that, he had to physically go into the locations on planet Earth, such as the International Trade Organization, World Trade Organization, and leg in as the American, the last American standing here in the United States that had the flag, had a banking constitution, had his own elemental chart and periodic table, to say, hey, I'm open for business and I want to open commerce back up. And so he went to these locations, to these giant corporations, and when he did, he disqualified that position because the syntax was found to be fraudulent. It was grammar fraud in relation to what he had constructed, because he had rebuilt the entire system for communication. And so the old communication system was thereby destroyed. So with it being destroyed, he's now got to go into these locations anyway, not just to set up international commerce for the United States, but to set them up properly, because they were destroyed with his construct. So now as he sets them back up proper, the Whore of Babylon that was once using International Admiralty and Maritime Law of the Sea to claim everyone as presumed missing, dead, or lost at sea. And when we went back to biblical scripture, of course, then this leads all the way back to that. You know, Satan accuses man day and night in front of the throne of God as already being dead. And when you further look at the esotericism behind that, he's basically trying to mirror what God did. And God destroyed the world by flood. Well, Lucifer's trying to do the same thing. He's killing all the people on the planet by saying they're presumed missing, dead, or lost at sea with a birth certificate system. So it's a mirror of what God has already done. This stuff goes all the way back into biblical prophecy, and the esotericism behind this warfare platform is demonstrated clearly by the Vatican with what's going on. And so it's speaking to us. It's in plain sight and right in the open, right in front of all of our faces. So as Russ set this system back up and went to each corporate location to say, hey, you know, he started at the Universal Postal Union up in Bern, Switzerland, and said, hey, charter's been disqualified, so I'm reopening it up properly and placing myself in as the Universal Postmaster General in Bern, Switzerland. So he did that, and each time he did that, he reconstituted the Whore of Babylon and made her a correct version. So now you got a mirrored image, a mirrored version of exactly what once was, but correctly. And so he used that whole system which was the system the United States was using anyway. But now he's got it, and it's correct. The whole thing is correct. And it took down all the global powers on the planet in the process, but resubstantiated them in correctness. So they haven't gone anywhere. They just had to adopt the new system. And with that system, there's no longer any ability to create contract fraud in that system. You can't lie, cheat, or steal, or create a loophole in the contract, because it's a mathematically certifiable grammar. So what it says is what it means, and what it means is what it says, and it's certified forward and backward. So they can't take this into court later and say, oh, what it meant was, or what it's supposed to mean later is this, because there's, in his now time construct with his grammatical construct, there is no past and future tense verbiage in the grammatical construct. So what it means is what it says now and forever. So in 100 years, when they pick that contract up and they say, well, what it was supposed to mean or what it is to mean later doesn't apply. It says now, is and are, what it is now. So it's still in now time. So 100 years from now, they can pick it up and say, wow, no, it still says today. Nothing to argue over here. So if you violate the contract, it's obvious, and you're busted for it. They'll take you to court. Of course, the ramifications behind that and the litany of charges that could be created would eliminate the opportunity for fraudsters and racketeers to try to take advantage of that system. It would be removed. When you further go back to look at this and take a real serious look and examine this entire thing, and we spent years on this now. We've spent a decade researching this entire matter. So what this gentleman has done is, with his construct, he has taken command and control of the entire planet. The construct that was there, he took command and control of and resubstantiated it, he mirrored it, but in a correct manner, using grammar correctly, using the word, the meaning of the word correctly. And with that, the powers that be lost all their powers. And of course, they had come unglued on this guy. They tried to get him to surrender the flag. They beat him pretty bad. Took him into court because what he had done was he had started court-martialing Bush and Cheney and 500 admirals and generals for not immediately jumping onto his plane and immediately initiating the changeover of the new government to take place all the way down to the civil level, so that contracts written by civil governments and state governments would all be operating with this quantum grammar construct, so that you couldn't racketeer anymore. There'd be no way to launder money to move pedophiles or guns or drugs or anything like that. The money was going to go where it was supposed to go. You couldn't borrow from the school slush fund to pay for the roads. That would be gone. That whole borrowing system of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul would be gone, and it was dissolved. And he wanted that correction made immediately. And because that didn't happen and they didn't join with him immediately, he court-martialed them. He started court-martialing everybody, saying there is no president. And of course, with the Florida Chads, the Bush and Cheney Florida Chad sideshow, once Bush was appointed, and he was appointed, he was not elected. And that's why you hear Trump today saying it's all rigged and we're stopping it. It's all fraud and we're ending it. Is because those guys, Bush and Clinton and Obama, were placed in there by this new world order, this shadow government, deep state, global apparatus that has been trying to capture the world and place everybody under a birth certificate system. So, because he had moved so rapidly with what he had done, he didn't have time to alert the NCO chain of command to say, hey guys, this is what's going on with the bankruptcy. They're about to surrender to the United States and raise a British flag here, and they're going to capture you all as chattel again, raise a British flag here, seize your guns. They put FEMA camps in place. Obama was coming for him. And thank God we did not get Hillary Clinton in there, because she was the final stake in the heart. And when we look at what's happening there, as far as the verbiage goes, the doublespeak these guys are using, this New World Order apparatus, the doublespeak they use, when you examine the tapes, when you go back and look at the New World Order tapes of President Bush Sr. talking, saying, you know, we're going to have we need to create laws that will protect the weak from the strong.
A world where the strong respect the rights of the weak.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations.
Strong. He's not talking about weak people as far as this person who's unemployed. He's talking about the weak people, the new world order being so few against the strong, the people of the world who don't want this apparatus to come into play, that know what these guys have up their sleeve in the long run. We've read the Bible. We know what it looks like. We know what they want to bring into fruition. We know what's coming. The playbook's in your hands. Everybody's got one. And so when he's saying we want to protect the weak from the strong and have freedom and peace, he's talking about the freedom to stop the rest of the world from allowing these guys to make laws freely and in peace so that they can't be stopped by the people. That's the doublespeak these guys are using, and it's very, very nefarious when you listen to it and you realize these guys aren't talking to the American people. They're talking to their bosses behind them. So with that, this entire system that Commander-in-Chief Russell J. Gould has taken over, he's corrected that system and taken it out of their hands, because the entire international admiralty and maritime law of the sea system, he rewrote all the codes and statutes and laws in relation to that and quantized everything into a mathematical, grammatical fact, disqualifying the old system because it was all grammar fraud. So he's taken tactical command and control of the entire system and taking it away from these guys, like taking matches from a little kid and spanking him on the backside for trying to burn the house down. That's exactly what this guy has done. In relation to a one world global government or a new world order, Commander-in-Chief Russell J. Gould's system is not that biblical or biblically prophesied one world government, new world order that is going to be so tyrannical that it crushes everyone beneath its foot. He literally stopped that from happening. And because they didn't want to play with him, because of what he had done was so great, and he had moved so fast, and he only alerted the upper echelons and told the bad guys, hey, I'm taking command and control here. He failed, and a huge oversight on his part was that he failed to tell the non-commissioned officer chain of command in the military what he was doing so people could get behind him and thank him for saving the country from, one, a surrender and takeover, and from, two, the New World Order apparatus's attempt to conquer the planet. He stopped it right in his tracks, but because he moved so fast and didn't alert the rest of the military, the bad guys kicked him to the side and placed in the Federal Reserve. So the banks moved in, the Federal Reserve Board moved into the Postmaster General position up in Washington, D.C., and chose the new Postmaster General. And that's all chronicled in the Congressional Record, which is all to be found in the 1999 Government Reformation Act. The government needed to be restructured anyway, because it was the end of the third and final international bankruptcy. But prior to that, we know this was a takeover attempt and a surrender attempt back to Great Britain, because the Admiral was sitting there waiting prior to the end of the third and final international bankruptcy in 1999. They had the Admiral set. They were waiting to get the Americans to join the European Union. It was already in place. We were this close to being surrendered, and he stopped it in its tracks. So when that happened, like I said, they didn't want to play ball with him. And as we looked at what was happening there, the P2 Mason lodges, the Knights of Malta, the Knights of Columbus, and the Jesuits were losing their minds. I mean, these guys were pulling their hair out, because Russell J. Gould was not groomed by the P2 Mason lodges. He's not a Mason. He's not a Knight of Columbus. He's not a Knight of Malta. He's not a Jesuit. He's an American, a guy from Wyoming who was smart enough to figure this whole thing out and save the country from being surrendered. So with that, no one wanted to play with him because there was no way to control this guy. There's no way to blackmail this individual. You can't pin pedophilia on him. You can't pin racketeering on him. He has done nothing but save the nation, set up a whole new construct globally. So because there's no way to blackmail or control this guy, they don't want to let him take over because he doesn't adhere to their standard operating procedures. He doesn't adhere to any of their beliefs, their belief systems, their belief structure, and they did not want to let him take tactical command and control the way he had. So after 12 years of these guys not wanting to play ball and just move forward in a factual manner in relation to what really took place here on this planet, in relation to the United States coming to the end of its third and final international bankruptcy, in relation to the fact that this gentleman captured the flag, in relation to the fact that this gentleman legged into the United Nations, in relation to the fact that he was declared a sovereign, and in relation to the fact that he legged back in here at the post office in Washington, D.C. in the United States, taking tactical command and control of the jurisdiction or the District of Columbia and all of the war powers. They didn't want to play ball at that. So he, at that point, mails himself around the world and sets up this entire global construct. It says, okay, well, I'll just go ahead and open the United States up, I'll open my government system back up, and in the process, take it all down. And the last thing he did was in 2012, after these guys moved forward for 12 years in an act of fraud, basically is what they did, because in reality what happened, they didn't tell the American people, hey, we need a new banking constitution created. We need a new Senate elected. We need a new Congress elected. We need to resubstantiate how we're going to bring forward a president and what he's going to be in charge of, and set the parameters up for that, what he will be in charge of, how the bankruptcy will work if we're even still going to ever have to go through another bankruptcy, but how Russell's banking system worked. The president was to be in charge of that. He would be the administrator of the finances still. So the system for the system of government for the United States didn't necessarily come to an end. It just needed to be, the new system needed to be recognized, and it needed to be brought into place. It just needed to be brought forward, and we could have kept going forward in a factual, proper manner in relation to what actually happened on planet Earth. But instead, they didn't want to play that, and they put in the Federal Reserve in there in Washington, D.C., and they've moved forward the way they have for the last 17 years. So after a 12-year run, on December 21st, 2012, Commander-in-Chief Russell J. Gould and David Windmiller went down and opened up the Benjamin Franklin Post Office in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, when you look at Washington, D.C., you have Admiralty. That is the Admiralty and Maritime Jurisdiction of the Sea, because it belonged to the King of Great Britain. And that's how he runs his country, under the Admiralty and Maritime Law of the Sea. Everybody's considered a little boat or a little vessel or a piece of cargo that's presumed missing, dead, or lost at sea. Same thing here in the United States. So that's the Admiralty and Maritime Jurisdiction of the Sea. So then he goes down to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is the civil jurisdiction, law of the land, and opens up the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania post office, which had been closed down with the start of the American Revolution. And it couldn't be opened back up because they owed 1.6 million francs to the French, so they were in bankruptcy. Bankrupt people can't contract, so they weren't allowed to open up commerce through that post office. So D.C. had to come in and put its post office, Great Britain had to come in and put its post office in up there. If they didn't, Spain or France was going to do it. So by opening up the Benjamin Franklin Post Office in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, he took the entire government system back down to the original location along with the flag and posted that Title IV flag up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And by doing so, since the birth certificate system ended, he now presents everybody with a claim of life, thereby shipping you out of the land of the dead and back onto the land in the civil jurisdiction, law of the land, where the blood testifies to the life. And with that, reconstitutes the entire American government again in a proper manner under the correct Title IV flag, using the correct communication, parse, syntax, grammar to establish all of his systems of government on this planet for you to then conduct commerce here in the United States. There are no more laws, rules, and regulations in relation to the old system. They've all been disqualified. So in 2017, Commander-in-Chief Russell J. Gould goes back to the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. And since the building was supposed to have left the United States because the end of the third and final international bankruptcy had come to an end, the Federal Reserve was, the Internal Revenue Service, which was the collection agency for the debt, had to be kicked out of the country because the bankruptcy had come to an end. It was over. So the Federal Reserve should have ended as well. But because it didn't leave, and for 17 years it sat there operating in a fraudulent manner, Commander-in-Chief Russell J. Gould goes down there and tells those guys, hey, why is this building docked on my land? I'm levying a fine against you. So he levied a fine against the Federal Reserve Board of Governors for having that vessel docked on his property. And the fine was 17 million tons of gold that he wants to use to assist Mr. Donald John Trump and Mr. James Mattis, Secretary of Defense, and the rest of the military and the people of this country to resubstantiate the government here, back the nation up, and create a new monetary system and place the values in his bank and on his platforms, place those values on his stock market platforms so that the United States can start conducting international commerce and trade again. He's been trying as hard as he can to try to get Mr. Donald John Trump's attention, to try to let him know what he's doing. He's trying to give Mr. Trump a flag and let him know, hey, I'd like to authorize what it is you're doing. I'm behind you with the clean out. 110%. This is something that he tried in 1999 to clean this apparatus out in 1999 and couldn't do it because he didn't alert the military and no one knew what he had done. He moved so fast no one knew what he had done. So the bad guys, the deep state, kicked him to the curb and kept moving forward. And that deep state apparatus is the deep state apparatus that Donald Trump is now finally cleaning out of Washington, D.C. And this is the reason we're bringing this forward. This is the largest national security secret in the history of the nation, if not the world itself, in relation to how it took down all the powers globally, how it was reconstructed, in relation to the mortgage, housing, financial crisis of 2007. This entire national security secret was revealed to us. We've gone through the congressional record, we've gone through the presidential papers, everything's there, it's all chronicled there. You can find it there. We've listened to the Navy SEALs scream, we've listened to my commanding general, Major General Jerry Boykin, say get involved. The Navy SEALs are yelling to get involved. Everybody's yelling, get involved, to us former special operations guys, to us military personnel, current, past, future, present. Get involved, figure out what's gone wrong, and fix it. Well, it's been fixed, guys, and it's been kept from us for 17 years. This gentleman's a national hero and deserves a medal of the highest honor. He saved the country, he saved the flag, he saved us from a surrender, a secret surrender, and domestic takeover here in the United States that nobody even ever saw coming. And I'm sure that when the attorney generals and the rest of the people here in the United States get a hold of this story and they do the research on the 3 international bankruptcies of the United States and they see how this apparatus works, they're going to come to the conclusion, the same conclusion we have in relation to what we found here. What is literally staring us right in our faces all day long. And that is that this gentleman deserves a medal of the highest honor and is quite frankly a national hero. What's going to happen if the United States doesn't adopt this new quantum system? Because it has its own elemental chart and its own periodic tables, this thing was considered genius by the Department of Energy. And the rest of the world got a hold of this thing. And I can tell you right now that if the United States does not adopt this system, and this system of grammar to create contracts on this planet, the bad guys will. And if those guys start creating contracts and subject the United States to their whims and their wills in relation to this construct, they will crush us like we have never been crushed before. Laws will be ironclad. Regulations will be ironclad. However, if they do not have Commander-in-Chief Russell -J Gould's thumbprint and signature on those documents to substantiate the executive authority required to legitimize such a document, it's not legal. But I can tell you this much: if we don't adopt it, the bad guys will, and they'll crush us with it. They cannot get around the elemental chart and the periodic table. They cannot get around the mathematical construct of that grammar. It's a fact. It is what it is, and it's taken down all that it's taken down. So from where is it that they have the ability to move forward from in a manner that would allow them to disqualify such a platform? They can't. So if we don't join with it, they'll take it, and it will be to our ruin. So the yellow fringe flag doesn't come from any nation. It's not registered. All flags are registered around the world with the United Nations. None of them in their copyright and patent have a yellow fringe on them. The yellow fringe was added after because everything's been captured in the international admiralty and maritime jurisdiction of the sea in a shipping war. So the yellow fringe denotes that it's been captured by the shipping war. But the shipping war is based in the international admiralty and maritime law of the sea. So the yellow fringe flag doesn't have a nation because the sea is not a nation. It's not registered as a nation with the United Nations. So when he captured the Title IV flag, as clearly laid out in Army regulation, the yellow fringe is a desecration of the flag. So he removed it because he destroyed the international admiralty and maritime jurisdiction of the sea when he took it over. So he removed the yellow fringe off it because he's captured the shipping war and released everybody from it by shipping them back in onto the land, at least here in the United States. So the yellow fringe flag doesn't have a nation. It's based in international admiralty and maritime law of the sea. Well, the sea is not a nation. It's not registered at the United Nations as a nation. So the yellow fringe flag is a flag of the sea. Well, the sea is nothing. So it's a flag of nothing. Basically, it's a corporation. It's a huge corporation, but they're using that admiralty and maritime jurisdiction in violation of its jurisdiction on the land in an act of warfare against the people, saying you're all boats and little vessels. Well, you can only claim a little boat or a little vessel if I'm out in the middle of the water. As your flag clearly denotes, you have a yellow flag or yellow fringe around it, saying we're at admiralty and maritime law of the sea. Well, if you're on the land, you're in violation of your jurisdiction, therefore you're conducting inland piracy. So these guys and their entire system globally, they are nothing more than pirates. That's all they are, and they've declared everybody else to be a vessel or cargo that they can rape, plunder, and pillage. So they're literally, this is a global group of pirates is what this is. So, yeah, wild, right? Wild. Over the last 10 years, we have gone and spoke with Commander-in-Chief Russell -J Gould several times. And he has continually told us time and time again that he's tried to reach out to Washington, D.C., to the administrative personnel up there to tell them what it is he's done, because this is being kept a massive secret away from the masses. And he keeps trying to make contact, and every time he does, he's not recognized, or his work is obfuscated. But he's been trying to get up there this last year to tell President Donald John Trump that, hey, this is what has happened, and I'd like to give you all the authorization in the world that you need to run the country legitimately, and I will back you all the way, but you've got to reach out to me. And he keeps trying to get up there and tell the guys, hey, this is the reality of what's happened here. You know, I know you think there's something that's something else, but it's not. When you look at the 3 international bankruptcies of the United States, this gentleman has walked this out. And it has been done. And he did it. And it needs to be recognized by the rest of us. And this is why we're bringing it forward to the rest of our community, to the Special Operations Command community, to the SEALs, to the Green Berets, guys like Ben Smith, who had the balls to step forward and make a stand, to the guys like Larry Ward, who had the balls to step forward and take the stand. This gentleman had the balls to step forward and take the stand for this entire nation. He captured the flag. He rebuilt the Constitution, the banking Constitution. He resubstantiated the entire global construct in a correct manner in an effort to correct the criminal malfeasance that is running wild on this planet, that none of us are happy with. A birth certificate system that has us all enslaved to it from cradle to grave, to include our children for generations to come, that literally ended in 1999. This entire system ended in 1999, and he's been trying to tell everybody, hey, look what I've done. Take a look. Stop with the Black Lives Matter. Stop with the race wars. Stop with the sideshows. Stop all this stuff and take a minute to look at what's happened here in the United States in relation to those 3 bankruptcies. And you will see what this guy has done. And the tyranny that we are all under the oppression of, these laws and these rules and these regulations that are being stuffed down our throats through the state's territories by the former 3 administrations that have been there since 1999 to 2017. And thank God Trump came forward. And thank God he's in there. And we're behind everything he's doing. In relation to all of that, the system has been corrected. And we're bringing this story forward to the rest of the Special Operations community for review. I'm urging you guys, look at this information. Look at the congressional record. Look at what's happened. Listen to his story. Listen to this gentleman tell you what has happened, and take a look at the construct. Because if we let this one go, I'm urging you guys, gentlemen, please, the guys in the Special Operations community, the guys out there that have urged us to find out what in the hell has gone wrong with the country, this is it. This is what has gone wrong with the country. And I'm urging you guys to research all of this. Take this seriously. Open your minds and open your eyes to it. Because it happened.
Well, I hope you begin to understand just how deep and serious all of this goes. But that episode that you've just sat through, and I hope you've got this far, that was to set the ball rolling for you to understand that a single individual was able to do so much. The history of silent takeovers, the methods by which tyrannical rule survives, is based on our ignorance of the laws of this and every other land. We are not lost at sea. We are not, nor ever were, or should be subject to maritime laws unless you agree by your silence. This also applies to vaccinations, in case you didn't know that, whether they say they're mandatory or not. But we will be covering that in a later episode. Your agreement is based on your lack of knowledge. Your silence is your slavery and is based on laws being hidden from us all. This is just part 1 in a series, and now you know how close you came to total domination via the banks and other nefarious institutions. We will move on to taking back your birthright in a later episode. This is not going to be some abstract advice on birth certificates you will be given. This is going to be actual practical steps, and most of the paperwork has been done for you, which you will be able to link through to. From birth certificates to traffic violations, you will be educated in the ways of the law of the land, and I hope you will teach others. Share with whomever you can, and please remember to support my efforts to bring you all of this by supporting my work via PayPal, Patreon or Bitcoin, or any way you can. I'll leave the links in the description below. And please like, subscribe and share this information, because as I say, it's part one of a several part series. So it is your mind that you need to remember. It is your mind that will set you free. So stop wasting your time protesting or signing well-meaning petitions, because that does not give you a lawful voice. It only serves to feed those who would have us remain in chains. So until next time, please question everything, believe nothing, and stay curious, because it's that curiosity that's going to save you from slavery. I'll see you on deck very soon.